What's up guys, JK Disc Golf here, and today we're going to be talking about how you can build the perfect disc golf bag. So, since you guys wanted to watch this video, I'm going to be giving you some tips, tricks, maybe a little more thoughtful insight on how you can construct the best disc golf bag so you can shred on the course. Firstly, I'm going to be talking about what is known as overlapping. A lot of disc golfers seem to not really understand this concept fully. So I'm going to give a brief definition of what overlapping in your disc golf bag means. And basically it just comes down to having two discs in your bag that have the same exact purpose. So that could be two discs that are overstable fairway drivers, like a Firebird and a Raptor. These discs typically do the same thing for players, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense to bag two of the same discs that are going to be serving the same point. Now, I will give my unpopular opinion right now, guys, and I'm just going to say, if there is overlap in your bag and you want it to stay, and there's two discs that you think serve two different purposes for two different situations, but other people look at it and it's not really how they see things, who cares? No one can tell you what to bag and why you bag it. Only you can come up with that concept, so don't let anyone discourage you from bagging anything. I'll talk about a little bit of overlap in my bag when we're talking about that, but just know, don't let anyone criticize your bag. If it works for you, use it. That being said, let's talk about how you can construct the best bag possible for your game. Firstly, the most important thing you could do is find yourself a good set of putters, and I would say almost every disc golfer would say bag two identical, same weight, same color. Make sure that they're as much the same as possible so you can get into your groove. So obviously, I have two Banger GTs, and they're exactly the same in every way. So typically, people also say to just try to use one and beat in one, so that's your beat in one. However, I use both because I want them to be beaten in pretty much at the same time, so there's no difference between my putter. However, there is a little difference there. If you want to beat in one disc can be a more understable version of your putter. It's really not going to make up a lot of difference, but I know that's a kind of a theory that a lot of people serve. So either if you want to beat them in the same so they fly identical, because I think the consistency is key, so that's what I do. Or if you want to beat in one and have that one be your flippier putter, you do whatever you do, but make sure that they're the exact same. You don't want to be putting with two different putters because that throws off rhythm and that throws off pretty much your whole game. You want to make sure as much consistency is there as possible. So firstly, we're going to cover putters. And really, for each of these slots in your bag, there's kind of three categories you want to make sure you're hitting for each and every one. One is your understable disc, two, your stable disc, and three, your overstable disc. And we're going to hit each and every one of those for every slot. Putters, mid-ranges, fairways, and distance drivers. So obviously, I bag a Link. This is my understable to stable. So this is what fills my stable or my understable slot. Then I go to my Razor Claw, which fills my stable spot, and then zones that both fill my stable and my overstable. Now this is where I talk a little bit about overlap. A lot of people tell me, and I hear it a lot, don't worry, that the Razor Claw and the zone fill the same slot. This would be considered overlapping. Now, the reason that I think it's okay to bag both of those for personal reasons is the Razor Claw feels so much better in my hand for backhand. So this is going to be my stable backhand or a little bit more overstable slot. And my zones are only going to be thrown sidearm. So that's where there is overlap, but they serve two completely different purposes in my bag. So that's why there is considered overlap, but I can bypass that by actually having a reason for it in my bag. Now, I would say the overlapping is okay when you have a personal reason that you're doing this. If I did the same thing and I had these both in my bag for the same purpose, that's when you would consider them to be overlapping because they're doing the exact same thing, and to keep that consistency, you want to cut one out. But as you can tell, they're serving two different purposes, and that's why I think it's okay to keep in my bag. Then we're going to go on and do the exact same thing for mid-ranges. We got to make sure we have an understable mid-range, a stable to straight mid-range, and an overstable mid-range. And you guys will be wondering, like, I don't throw the Mego 3 a lot. But the reason that I have it in my bag is because I know at some point on the course, I'm going to need an understable mid-range shot. And if I don't have it in my bag, I'm going to be screwed because I don't have it. But if I do have it there and I don't throw it very often, at least at some time I can pull it out and not be worried that I don't have it. So make sure you're always prepared. You'd rather be prepared than not have to use it than have to use it and not be prepared. Then we go on and do the same thing for fairway. Understable, stable to straight for a little bit more overstable, and then overstable. And because you can tell, my mid-range game is where they're starting to kind of mesh more between the stable and the understable, and that's okay. But you just need to make sure that even though you're touching the lines, that they're kind of considering making sure you have an understable that can stay understable for you in times, and some that can be thrown straight at times. So like I said, I have 2 FDs that kind of are understable and one's kind of stable, but as long as I'm hitting the lines of stable and understable and overstable, you're definitely okay. You're going to be okay filling that bag. Now I think distance driver is where confusion really begins, and that's because we have this set of 3-tiered system where we've been going on from putters to fairway drivers, where we've been talking about understable, stable, and overstable. And you're going to want to do the same thing with your distance drivers, but like I said, it gets a little bit more complicated. So first, let's break it down. I have my understable distance drivers. I have my stable or straight distance drivers. And then I have my overstable distance driver. Now this is where I think it gets a little bit more complicated, because as you can tell, again, maybe it seems like a little bit of overlapping, but I bag Wraiths, Emperors, and Destroyers, which are all very, very similar. Now the reason, again, I think I can do this is you have to be prepared for all situations, and that's where distance drivers really come in. So Wraiths, as I said, I bag Wraiths, they fill in my understable slot, and they also fill my tailwind spot. Because as you guys know, when you're throwing in a heavy tailwind or a tailwind at all, it's harder to get your disc to kind of turn and give you that full flight. So with a little bit more understable discs, it's easier for me to get that big consistent flight that I've been wanting out of my other drivers. Then in calm situations, I can throw my Emperors. If there's no wind at all, I can throw these discs and kind of trust them to fly like a nice natural turnout of them. And then same thing opposite with the Wraiths. When I get a little bit of headwind at me, and guys, you probably know what happens in the headwind, as discs tend to turn over faster, I have my more overstable distance drivers. So as you can tell, I have one main focus with my distance driver. I have one select shot that I'm trying to mimic with each and every mold, even though they kind of perform in a little bit of different ways. So obviously, I'm trying to mimic the Emperor shot. That's my no wind. That's my shot where I know I can consistently put it on a hyzer line, let it go, let it turn, and do its whole jazz. Now, the reason I have bag Wraiths and Destroyers is to mimic the same shot out of my Emperor, just in different situations. So I'm preparing. If I go out and I play in 20 mile per hour tailwind, I know that I'm going to be bagging, or I'm going to be throwing Wraiths that day. But if there's a headwind that comes at me at a certain angle of a hole, now I know that I can be throwing that Destroyer on the same hyzer angle, on the same power, but it's just a different disc. So I'm doing everything the same. Like I said, I'm keeping that consistency. I'm just changing up the mold to get the same shot. And that's where I think building your bag should surround on. Not picking certain discs that should be flown, or so this is where I get a little confusing from other people. A lot of people say you should bag very minimal molds to mimic the same disc, and I would argue that I think you should mimic it the same shot. So it gets very confusing, like I said, but this is just talking about how to build the perfect bag for you. So if you're going to be comfortable bagging 8 different Destroyers that fly slightly different, do it, 100%. But the person that I'm like, I like to grab discs immediately, fresh and brand new, and know how they're going to fly for me. That's why I bag 3 different molds for one shot, just in different situations. I know it gets a little bit confusing, and I'm trying to break it down as in much simple terms as I possibly can. And I know in some situations I'm not all that good at it. But hopefully that I can come across the point where you're trying to build your bag around different situations. We have an understable, a stable, and an overstable disc. And I'm hoping that when you guys fill these slots, you're going to have every single shot for every single situation. If you're leaving one of these discs out and you're filling a slot, there's going to be times on the course when you're going to need that shot and you're not going to specifically have it. So just make sure you keep that in mind when you're building the bag. If you hit every one of these slots, then you're going to be perfectly fine on the course and you're going to be ready for any situation that's thrown at you. Also keep in mind, which a lot of people don't consider, personally, I'm someone who has specific sidearm discs compared to specific backhand discs. And what I mean by that is when I throw sidearm, I kind of turn discs over or I roll my wrist over more so the discs seem to appear more understable. So make sure when you're kind of focusing on different things you do. I know a lot of people throw more overstable discs, if that means it's going to be your overstable distance driver or if you're going to need to step above it. Just know you're going to have flaws in your game and you're going to need to fill discs in certain situations. Like I know a lot of people use utility discs, super overstable discs where you can be able to throw thumbers, tomahawks, or super understable discs where you can throw like really fast rollers down, which I do have that disc in my bag. So like I said, you want to make sure you're not only filling the base slots that we talked about, but you also want a little bit of hint discs in there as well, like super overstable or super understable discs. Or you want to make sure that you're covering every single shot and every single situation on the course. And guys, don't be afraid to throw the same mold. If you are a guy who likes to throw all the same mold, like I bag 5 destroyers, do that. I talked about how I have an understable, stable, and overstable distance driver, but you can fill those slots with one disc. I have a super understable destroyer that can fly similar to my Wraith. The problem is, when I lose this destroyer, that disc is gone for me. That's why I prefer to throw Wraiths in the understable spot, because if I lose all my Wraiths, I can just go buy a new one and I know exactly how it's going to fly. But I've had this destroyer in my bag for 5 years. If I lose this, it's going to take me a very, very long time to get a destroyer to fly just like this one. So that's in a situation where I think it's easier to just bag a different mold than it is to be in your disc. Obviously, that's just a personal preference. If you're someone that wants to just beat in your discs to fly in a certain way, definitely do that. Because like I said in the beginning of this video, guys, it's your bag. You bag whatever you want. These are just some tips that I've had along the way that I found help me. But just because it helped me doesn't mean it's going to not help you guys. So if you want to bag all the same disc, you do it. If you want to bag 18 different discs, I'm all for it. Do what's going to make you best. Honestly, I'm not one to criticize you for doing what you want. Just go out there, have a good time on the course. That's all I care about. If these tips helped you build a better disc golf bag, or going to take them into consideration when you're kind of creating a new bag, make sure to drop a like on this video, guys. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell so you get notifications on all the new videos. And as always, guys, make sure to keep throwing. Big thanks to everyone who's supported JK Disc Golf over on Patreon. You guys are the reason that this video is possible. If you want to help out JK Disc Golf even more, head over to www.patreon.com/JK Disc Golf or click the link in the description below.